ITN News at 10 with Julia Somerville.
Free tonight, the battered wife who killed her husband. A violent end to the hijacking of a tourist bus. Police chief insists we'll target young black muggers. And the mother who drowned her children is sentenced. Good evening. Sarah Thornton, sentenced to life for murdering her violent husband, left jail this evening and probably won't have to go back. She'd served 5 years. She was freed by the Court of Appeal on bail until a second appeal against her sentence is heard in the autumn. She said tonight she was sure she would win it. Her release appears to confirm a change in attitude by the courts to women who kill violent partners. Our Home Affairs correspondent Harry Smith reports.
Sarah Thornton walked through the gates of Holloway Prison a short time ago after a court had ordered her release on bail. She told waiting reporters how it felt when she first heard the news.
Relieved. It's a bit hard to believe it after so long, but delighted.
Sarah Thornton was jailed 5 years ago for stabbing her husband Malcolm with a kitchen knife. She said it was Malcolm's violent and drunken abuse over a long time which drove her to kill. But the Court of Appeal later rejected her plea of provocation on the grounds that when she stabbed her husband, time had elapsed since the provocation. She hadn't therefore acted in the heat of the moment. But a number of cases since have highlighted changes in judicial attitudes. 3 years ago, Karanjit Alwalia walked free after the appeal court accepted she was guilty of manslaughter and not murder after she burnt her husband to death. And earlier this month, Emma Humphreys was released after appealing against a life sentence for stabbing her violent lover.
The law of provocation has always worked much more successfully for men, and what we're seeing happening is greater fairness. We're not seeing a softening up of the law. We're seeing just fairness being created for many people for whom the law was failing.
Sarah Thornton's supporters greeted her outside Holloway with a rapturous welcome, but relatives of her late husband condemned the decision to release her.
This is a mockery. Why do they have the expensive court trials if they're just going to pat a woman on the head and say, well, don't do it again, you know, the pressure groups are at us, off you go. That's no justice.
Sarah Thornton is out but not innocent. As she toasts her freedom in a friend's garden tonight, she knows she must still argue her case at a second appeal. But after her early release, she's now confident of winning. Indeed. Harry Smith, News at 10, North London.
The Prime Minister, now facing life with a Commons majority of 9, tried to play down last night's by-election success by the Liberal Democrats. He said Littleborough and Saddleworth would return to the Conservatives, like other by-election losses at the general election. The Conservative share of the vote slumped by 21%, taking them from first to third place with just under 10,000 votes. Labour's share rose by 14% with just over 14,000 votes. The victorious Liberal Democrats' share went up just under 3%, giving them a majority of around 2,000. Here's our political editor, Michael Brunson.
The happiness of the Liberal Democrats over emerging as the winners of the Where Do the Disaffected Tories Turn To state has been clouded by their anger at what they regard as Labour's vicious and dirty campaign.
With this by-election, we confirm that even in an area surrounded by Labour, where we are the challengers to the Conservatives, and even when Labour throws the kitchen sink at us, and some would argue the dustbin too, we're able to continue to win, and that shows the strength of the party, not only here, but elsewhere as well.
Peter Mandelson, masterminding the Labour operation at this by-election, defended his tactics, saying that probing opposition candidates' personal policy positions was perfectly legitimate, and that the Liberal Democrats had played it pretty rough too. But Tony Blair denied that it could mean the end of dialogue and some cooperation with the Liberal Democrats.
No, these campaigns are tough, and we fight them to win them, as indeed the Liberal Democrats do. But I've made it clear there are areas where we should cooperate sensibly, and we have to cooperate from a position of strength.
The Prime Minister admitted that it wasn't much of a result for the Conservatives, though he said the core Tory vote had held.
Clearly, this wasn't as good a result as we would have liked. We would have liked to have won the seat, self-evidently so. But it's perfectly clear that the bedrock of the Conservative vote stayed there more effectively in this by-election than it has done in the past.
But before a speech in Cambridge tonight, John Redwood, who challenged Mr Major for the leadership, suggested that bad results and a bad press showed the party had lost touch with the voters.
My message to the party tonight is that we have to win back the voters first, and then the press will follow. They are listening to our electors, to their customers. All the time that those electors are critical, the press is in part going to reflect that in what they write.
Nothing, though, could hide the Liberal Democrats' joy today, as once again they defied their national poll ratings to punch the Tories on the nose. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
And Michael Brunson joins me now from Westminster. Michael, we saw what Tony Blair had to say about Labour's relations with Lib Dems in the future, but what do you think is going to be the impact on this, on their future cooperation?
Well, I'm afraid I take a rather cynical view about all this. I think that the talk of cooperation between Labour and the Liberal Democrats is born of the fact that neither of those parties know exactly what is going to happen after the general election. It might be a very narrow result indeed. And indeed, in the past, of course, they have needed cooperation on local councils, for example, making common cause against the Tories. But there are many people in the Labour Party who don't like this kind of talk. There are one or two in the Liberal Democrats, people like Liz Lynn notably, who don't like it either. And I think what you see is that when they get into a head-to-head situation, as they most definitely did in this by-election, then the gloves come off, and to mix my metaphors, they fight like tigers.
Well, as we also saw, all three main parties are trying to draw some comfort from this result, but who do you actually think has got the most to smile about?
I think Labour have got the most to smile about tonight. What normally happens in these seats where the Liberal Democrats are second to the Tories in a by-election like this is that the Tory voters tend to stay at home and the Liberal Democrats romp away. Well, now what seems to have happened here is that, yes, the Tory voters, the bedrock vote did seem to hold up, but those who might have been tempted to vote Tories stayed at home, but that there was a sufficient vote attracted across to Labour. You see the way both their share of the vote went up and the swing to Labour went up more markedly than to the Liberal Democrats. And certainly Labour are very, very happy tonight at their performance of coming from a poor third to a good second.
Michael Brunson, thank you. A bus tour around the historic German city of Cologne turned to horror today for the 20 passengers on board. A gunman travelling on the bus shot dead the driver and took everyone else hostage. Eventually, German police stormed the bus, shooting dead the gunman. One of the hostages also died during the siege. Howell Jones reports from Cologne.
For 7 hours, the hostages huddled in the tour bus, curtains drawn in stifling heat in terror of the masked gunman. German police commandos knew they were dealing with a violent man. The Russian-speaking hijacker had already shot the driver dead. In broken English and German, the gunman continued to utter threats and demands over the vehicle's mobile phone. Escaping the bus would take raw courage. But this 11-year-old boy made a break for freedom. He suffered only cuts to his hands as he escaped from the bus's shattered rear window. A middle-aged man took the same route later, bleeding heavily from a neck wound, but still able to remove his blindfold and crawl to help. Soon after, the police stormed the bus, smashing windows with iron bars, taking aim with firearms. Some hostages smashed their own way out to safety. In the hail of bullets fired into the bus, the hijacker died, but police found one more victim, a woman passenger shot dead in front of her fellow tourists. The siege began violently and ended in bloodshed, but not with the catastrophe and loss of life many here had feared. Howell Jones, News at 10, Cologne.
The Bosnian Serbs have declared martial law across the parts of Bosnia they control, ready, they say, to counter attacks by Croatian forces in the west. Croatian soldiers are pouring across the border. They've captured 2 Serb-held towns, Grahovo and Glamoch. Further north, there's been heavy fighting in the Bihać enclave. Thousands of shells have been fired. In Sarajevo itself, French UN peacekeepers stationed on Mount Igman overlooking the city have come under attack from Bosnian Serbs. Mark Austin reports from Mount Igman.
British troops on heightened alert for the first time since they deployed on Mount Igman. The alert followed a Serb attack on an observation post in which a French UN peacekeeper was injured. He was treated for shrapnel wounds by British medics before being flown to Split for further treatment. Today, at a well-protected press conference deep in the forest on Mount Igman, a French colonel described how his infantrymen encircled the Serb position before the Serbs pulled out.
The people in front of us have to know that at any moment, any time, we are able to deliver all our strength, all our power.
The 105mm guns of the Royal Artillery were also on standby to fire, having received the go-ahead from London.
I think they were delighted, from the point of view that's what they're here for, and they're available to support our friends and our comrades here.
On the surface, Anglo-French relations here are all smiles, but beneath the bonhomie, the approach differs. The French have suffered more casualties in Bosnia than any other UN force, and there's a sense that they want to take preemptive action to get even. This action by French troops shows the UN military build-up here is more than bluster, and it may not be long before British artillery is firing here for the first time. Mark Austin, News at 10 on Mount Igman.
Private Lee Clegg is to be allowed to stay in the army. The Ministry of Defence made the announcement tonight. Private Clegg was released from jail earlier this month, 4 years into the life sentence he was given for the murder of a passenger in a stolen car outside Belfast. Britain's top police chief, Sir Paul Condon, today stuck to his uncompromising message to the black community over mugging. He warned that his officers would be arresting many young black men in a new police crackdown on street crime starting next week. He said it wasn't their blackness that made them criminals, but many of the youngsters who were going to be arrested would be black. Ian Glover-James reports.
They should have been inside Scotland Yard, invited by Police Commissioner Sir Paul Condon to a conference on street crime. Instead, some black leaders snubbed him, demonstrating outside, angry at his claim that many muggings in London were the work of black youths.
I'm concerned that if black young people are targeted, there might well be a reaction. But Mr. Condon has to explain that, and he has to be responsible for that.
Inside the yard, Sir Paul, facing a lower turnout, steadfastly reported that half police arrests in London for street crime involved blacks, that 70% of victims said their attacker was black.
Our anxiety was that we shouldn't start a major operation where we knew in advance we would be arresting significant numbers of black youngsters without being up front telling people why and how and what it was about.
He was talking about Operation Eagle Eye, a planned police initiative on street crime. But race relations officials are uncomfortable at how it's been handled.
Well, Sir Paul has invited people along, has created a lot of division, a lot of feeling among minority communities, particularly the black community.
There is no colour in crime. People commit crimes. I don't want my father, my brother, my cousins being labelled as muggers.
Sir Paul Condon accepts that by signalling his plans in advance, he risked alienating some black community leaders. Whether it works will be known when Operation Eagle starts next week.
Coming next on News at 10, the life or death sentence tonight on the American mother who drowned her 2 children. Why more and more of us are choosing to spend our holidays in this country. And Hill says he'll continue a friendly rivalry with Schumacher despite that crash.
We are here to compete as sportsmen and not as bitter enemies, you know, trying to hurt each other.
In the last half hour, the American woman who drowned her children in the back of her car has escaped the death sentence. The jury voted unanimously to sentence Susan Smith to life instead. It marks the end of a case that has both gripped and horrified Americans. Jonathan Munro reports from the United States.
For a week she has been a convicted murderer, but unsure whether she would die for her crimes. It was last year that Susan Smith claimed her missing sons had been kidnapped.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
But as she appealed for their return, she knew what no one else did. They were dead. Smith's marriage had already broken down and she had found a new lover. In his...
Now, if you're about to take your summer holiday in this country, you're joining the growing band of people who are choosing not to go abroad. To keep its resorts as competitive as possible, the English Tourist Board is asking for money from the National Lottery to improve seaside towns which have seen better days. Adam Holloway reports.
Bristol Airport this afternoon on what Britain's seaside resorts most fear. Charter flights full of holidaymakers bound for resorts beyond our shores. This is not Mallorca or Lanzarote. It's the beach at Weston-super-Mare, one of the many resorts who fought hard to claw back some of the tourists. Across the UK as a whole, most people still choose to holiday at home than go abroad, but the proportion staying here has declined over the past decade. The total number of British holidaymakers grew by 10 million to 58 million, but 10 years ago, 69% holidayed at home. Last year, it was down to 54%. But the picture in England announced today is much brighter, with domestic holidays up 24% on 1993.
We're competing with those overseas operators taking people out of this country, and that's really very helpful to the industry. And what's more, today we've announced a 25 million bid to the Millennium Commission so that we can actually improve access to our coastline and our resorts.
Weston-super-Mare's council are one who'd bid for any extra money. Despite its relative success, like many other resorts, there's decline and decay, structures from the past that the local economy alone can't support. They'd like money for the buildings on Knightston Island. Most are in such a state of dereliction they're too dangerous to use. The council say that a bit of extra money would enable them to renovate these buildings. Then they could lease them out to commercial ventures for things that could be used all year round. Even when the sunshine's pouring in, there's a problem all the resorts agree on: the weather, something money will never change.
A groom who worked at a stud farm near Newmarket was jailed for life today for murdering his boss, the millionaire racehorse trainer Alex Scott. William O'Brien had had a row with Mr. Scott 2 days before he shot him dead. Eric McInnes reports from Norwich Crown Court.
Alex Scott's widow, Julia, has sat through court proceedings all week, relying heavily on family and friends for support. She remains bewildered why William O'Brien shot her husband dead, though is content to know that justice has been done. He will serve life for murder. Alex Scott, a brilliant young trainer with over 160 winners in just 6 years, employed O'Brien as a groom at his Newmarket stud. During the trial, the jury were taken there and saw the room where the murder took place. Afterwards, O'Brien, seen here in the striped shirt, helped to reenact what happened. His defence team used the actual murder weapon, a single-barreled shotgun. The only witness to the murder was Scott's gardener, Christopher Forster.
Mr. Scott was laid on the floor. Mr. O'Brien was stood over him with the shotgun pointing down towards him. He just said, "This is for you, you bastard," and shot him.
Sentencing O'Brien, the judge told him, "This was a terrible thing you did. For reasons difficult to fathom, you totally lost your temper, and in a moment of passion you picked up that gun and shot Mr. Scott." The judge said it was a tragedy for Julia Scott and her 3 children.
He was the most wonderful husband, father, and a very dear friend to all who knew him. My family and friends have been a great support.
Mrs. Scott added that her husband had died in his prime. His life, his promising racing career ended in a split second of murderous spite. Eric McInnes, News at 10, Norwich.
2 British women have been found guilty in the United States tonight of plotting to murder an American lawyer. Sally Ann Croft and Susan Hagen were both followers of the American guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. The lawyer had been investigating immigration fraud at the Bhagwan's commune. The 2 women have not been sentenced yet. A television journalist has won £40,000 damages and an apology from the Department of Trade over comments made about a Channel 4 Dispatches documentary. Martyn Gregory's programme about the export of torture equipment by 3 British companies was falsely termed contrived and scaremongering by DTI ministers. For centuries, the landscape of China has been dominated by rice fields. Now, though, things are changing. Because of an increasingly Western-style economy, peasants get more money for growing other things or for going to work in factories. This year, for the first time, China will become a net importer of rice, something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Our Asia correspondent Caroline Kerr has sent this special report.
In the rural heartland of China, rice production has demanded physical toil and human hardship for thousands of years. Hello! But now China's peasants are tiring of this back-breaking work. And a new generation is demanding an easier lifestyle. A Across the country, the job of hauling in the rice harvest is being abandoned in favour of less arduous work in the cities. In the rush to the towns, only the fittest may survive. But in the years since China's economic reforms began, the numbers who flock to the cities amount to more than double the entire population of the United Kingdom. And for those who stayed behind, the city has come to them. In Guangdong province, thousands of factories have been built on some of the most fertile land in the country. Xie Li Chung used to be a rice farmer until 2 years ago when the government decided to build a wood processing plant on the site of his paddy fields. But he's not complaining. As a factory hand, he brings home 3 times as much money to his family as he used to when he farmed rice. With the extra money, he told me, he's built a new house and he's bought 2 colour televisions, a fridge, a telephone and a washing machine. I'm making loads of money now, he says. Why would I ever want to go back to farming? Li Ximing hasn't given up on farming, but he gave up on rice 10 years ago, and by local standards he's become a wealthy man. He grows lychees, which are exported throughout the world, and he isn't alone. Now other farmers are trying to catch up with him. Most of his neighbours here have switched to cash crops too, because they know that's where the money can be made. Most peasants who do still grow rice in Guangdong only produce enough for their own families. As a result, Western experts are afraid that China is losing the ability to feed itself, as rice supplies dwindle even in the most fertile regions. Local officials here insist that rice production is not in serious decline. But it's hard to understand when they admit in the same breath that they've lost more than 230,000 acres of paddy fields to development in just a couple of years. Environmentalists fear China's rice shortage could become a global problem. When 1/5 of the world's population needs to import grain, there simply won't be enough to go around.
I see what's happening in China as sort of a wake-up call. My own sense is that food scarcity is going to become a greater threat to national security in many countries than the threat of military aggression.
For the Chinese, the traditional way of life of millions of peasants is being changed forever. But if it causes an international grain crisis, the consequences will be felt throughout the world. Caroline Kerr, News at 10, Southern China.
Now brace yourselves. England are in a strong position in the 4th test at Old Trafford. At the close of play, England were 131 runs ahead on 347 for 7. Much of it was thanks to an impressive innings from Graham Thorpe, who was just 6 runs short of his century when he was caught by Murray off Bishop. And tonight's main headlines again. Sarah Thornton, sentenced to life for murdering her violent husband, left jail this evening. She's been granted bail pending an appeal. She said tonight she's confident she'll win it. And the American mother Susan Smith has been sentenced to life for drowning her 2 children. And we're sorry we lost our report on that case from America. Finally tonight, motor racing's big rivals Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher are gearing up for Sunday's German Grand Prix. This time it's Schumacher who'll be on his home circuit, but after today's practice at Hockenheim, it's Hill who's in provisional pole position, with David Coulthard second and Schumacher third. Hill was booed when he spun off the track, but he put all talk of rivalry with Schumacher behind him.
We are here to compete as sportsmen and not as bitter enemies, trying to hurt each other.
And that's News at 10. Good night and have a good weekend.
Hello, good evening. Well, as if it wasn't warm enough already, a warm front moved across Britain today, making it even warmer and more humid for the weekend. The remnants of that weather system is going to be lying close to the north and west of Britain right through the weekend, and that will produce further showery outbreaks of rain. But for the rest of us, it will be dry, very warm indeed, and quite sunny as well. What about tonight, though? Well, a lot of cloud around overnight tonight, some misty low cloud, a few patches of fog as well, and still that thicker band of cloud with the weather front producing further showery bursts of rain up in the north-western corner of Britain. Certainly a mild night, in the south temperatures probably no lower than 17, and that's 63. Now, what about tomorrow? Well, not a promising start for many people, rather grey, overcast, quite misty in a few places first thing in the morning, but the mist won't last very long and the cloud will break up too, and we're set for a lot of sunshine, particularly through tomorrow afternoon. The eastern side of Scotland, eastern parts of Northern Ireland quite bright as well, but once again the threat of a few showers for the far northwestern corner. And now the temperatures, well, it's heading towards 30 in places, certainly up to around 28, and that's 82 degrees Fahrenheit, very warm and humid with it. Sunday, a similar sort of day, rather misty at first perhaps, but that won't last very long. Lots of sunshine to look forward to, a few showers in the north and west, and as temperatures once again head towards 30, we'll see just the odd heavy shower breaking out down in the south and west, perhaps even a rumble of thunder, but they'll be very few and far between. Most of the weekend will be completely dry, quite sunny with it, and very warm indeed. So enjoy the weekend. Maybe we'll get some rain eventually for the farmers and gardeners next week. Here's a summary.
Sponsored by PowerGen, producing electricity, whatever the weather.